I had an ulterior motive that I'd been thinking about for a long time. I really wanted to fix the film and have it be completed.
It's no secret that since its 20th anniversary special edition re-release in 1997, the original Star Wars trilogy has seen numerous CGI additions and changes. While it was Lucas's intention that these changes were to make the film, as the name suggests, more special, not everyone saw them as such. Many die-hard fans proved to be exceedingly upset at George altering his beloved classics, even more so because he refused to release the originals to the public. The only version made available was the re-edited, remixed, and remastered Special Edition. In the early 2000s, many fans took to internet forum pages, most notably on originaltrilogy.com, to address Lucas's short-sightedness. A petition was created on the site to release the theatrical cuts and received over 72,000 signatures by 2006. It was also here that many users began transferring Laserdisc copies of Star Wars to DVD themselves. In the early days, originaltrilogy.com was a thriving center for bootleg preservation. However, while the forum users were obsessively scrambling to get as much picture quality as they could from these standard definition discs, one man had a vision, and his name was Garrett Gilchrist. This is the story of how Garrett Gilchrist saved Star Wars. Garrett was born on April 20th, 1981 in Connecticut, and graduated from the University of Southern California in 2004, being awarded with a bachelor's degree in cinema and television production. During his late teenage years in the 90s, Garrett developed a love for film and began doing restoration projects as a hobby, and soon thereafter, professionally. Compared to most, his resume is rather impressive. In 2005, he released a documentary called Star Wars Deleted Magic, which showcased how the special effects in A New Hope had been created.
Understand, I just can't afford to make exceptions. Where would I be if every pilot who smuggled for me dropped his consignment at the first sign of an Imperial starship? It's not good business.
Look, Jabba.
He also worked on a very intensive restoration project for the movie The Thief and the Cobbler. His aptly named Recobbled Cut reportedly took him 7 years of research and 2.5 years of painstaking frame-by-frame restoration. On top of this, he also undertook animating Lost Doctor Who episodes, wrote and directed a superhero film, published comic books and novels. The list of his endeavors goes on. While some of his directorial work was met with mediocre critical reception, his knowledge of film preservation, on the other hand, is deep, and his list of experiences long. Apart from these, his most significant contribution to the Star Wars community wasn't his Deleted Magic documentary, as some would think, but rather it was a different kind of project altogether. A project that he dubbed the Classic Editions. Growing up, Garrett had watched documentaries such as The Making of Star Wars, which he says were the largest inspiration for him wanting to get into filmmaking. During the early 2000s, the poor reception of the Star Wars prequels took much of Garrett's enthusiasm for the franchise away, so working on Star Wars documentaries and fan edits were a way for him to reconnect with what he loved about the movies. This led him to create what we now know as the Classic Editions. Garrett joined originaltrilogy.com in September of 2004, donning the alias OCP Movie, and made his first post to the subforum Star Wars Preservation the very same day. Despite being brand new, his ambition was present from the start. Within this post, Garrett described his idea. It was a basis for a new type of preservation, not one that just transferred already existent video, but one that edited and conformed multiple sources to a single cut. Garrett recognized that even though Laserdisc transfers were becoming quite impressive, they would never truly match a DVD in their sharpness and clarity. His suggestion, therefore, was to use the recently released 2004 DVD as a main source and then insert Laserdisc footage where special edition changes existed. It is here that we get the first ever instance of the word despecialized. Garrett created this term long before it was ever used to describe Harmy's now famous despecialized editions. His idea was met with both intrigue and skepticism. Some claimed that the differing levels of consistency between sources would be too distracting for viewers. Others were concerned about the framing and audio timing differences between releases. Despite these objections, Garrett got to work. After much effort and determination, on May 19, 2005, Garrett released his first classic edition for A New Hope to the world. Using the 2004 DVD as his main source, and the Calclops Laserdisc bootleg to patch in theatrical elements, Garrett created a cut of Star Wars that he claimed was, quote, not the way it was, but the way you remember it. You see, originally he had set out not to create a purely despecialized version of Star Wars, but rather his own ideal version of the movie. However, because it just so happened that his version of an idealized Star Wars was one which lacked any special edition changes, people began to consider his release as such. Its sound mix was probably the most unfaithful part of the recut. Using the 1993 THX remix as a source, he then patched in sound elements from the much beloved, but much more complex 1977 mono mix. His reasoning for such being that even though the mono mix was released some months after the initial screenings of the film, it was considered a much more comprehensive and complete sound mix. He wanted to include some of its elements in his new cut. His release also boasted features which were rather impressive for the time, such as 16:9 anamorphic widescreen and Dolby Digital sound. The classic editions also featured working animated menus, chapter selection, a custom audio commentary track, and even the option to have a specialized THX intro precede the movie. While at the time there were bootlegs which had a mere selection of some of these features, the classic editions blew them all out of the water by including them all. Much of the work that Garrett did to combine both sources was simple shot-by-shot splicing.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
Before these scenes could be tied together, it was important for them to first match in visual quality. To start off, the Laserdisc footage received a healthy dose of sharpening to help it match the clarity of the DVD. The difference in framing and cropping between the DVD and Laserdisc was another preliminary issue which needed to be addressed. Believe it or not, differences in cropping between releases is a rather common phenomenon even today. Every time a movie is released onto home video, restoration companies must choose how they want to crop the frame. There are some techniques which can be used to guarantee consistent results across releases, such as aligning the film with an SMPTE chart. But of course, because viewers are unlikely to notice a difference across two releases, this alignment practice is often skipped. The whole cropping process only exists because of the natural trade-off between vertical and horizontal picture information. If you want to display more horizontal details, then some vertical details must be cut off. And if you want to display more vertical details, then some horizontal details will be cut off. Color correction was also necessary to help bridge the gap between the two sources. This was yet another process which was unheard of for a fan to do at the time. The 2004 DVD had an infamously bad color grade, one which pushed magentas to compensate for the weak color reproduction of CRT monitors. This created what has become colloquially known as lobster man syndrome, as skin tones become horribly pink. The 2004 DVD was also plagued with crushed blacks, which led to significant detail loss in dark areas, even when compared to the decades-old Laserdisc master. For some parts of the film, simply splicing shots together wouldn't be enough. Garrett had to literally paint out some special edition changes, not unlike what Harmy would later do with his despecialized editions. To top it all off, wipes and dissolves were carefully recreated so that original elements could seamlessly transition to specialized ones. With all of these techniques in his arsenal, Garrett was able to deliver a product which sent ripples through the preservation community. Due to the technical limitations of the early 2000s, however, these versions did indeed come with some drawbacks. Compression artifacts, especially in dark spaces, tended to plague the earlier releases of his movie. Garrett expressed that this was again the product of technological limitation. It all depended on whether or not his project was viewed on a CRT monitor or a flat-screen display. What may have appeared non-existent or black on a CRT would have appeared a light gray color on a flat screen, thereby making the compression artifacts usually hidden in the dark much more apparent on modern displays. However, this was corrected later for the 2.0 release. His 2.0 release of A New Hope utilized a dual-layer disc, meaning that the video was of a higher quality than the single-layer 1.0 version. Aliasing was also a problem in places, this being a product of the low-resolution nature of the sources used. Despite these noticeable visual flaws, the classic edition for A New Hope was generally well received, and Garrett would soon continue work and create classic editions for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. A few months later, in September of 2006, Empire's Classic Edition was released. While with A New Hope, many users were critical of his work, Empire, on the other hand, received much more widespread acclaim. Sure enough, a few months later, the Classic Edition for Return of the Jedi was released as well, being nearly universally well received and anticipated by the community. Garrett's work was truly groundbreaking for its time and gave people a glimpse at what Star Wars preservation was soon to become. However, not all stories have a happy ending. After all, you may be wondering, with all the acclaim that these projects accrued, why is it we don't remember Garrett or his work? I had the pleasure of speaking to Garrett over email. While he politely declined to be interviewed, he did provide a few comments concerning my research. As I'm sure many people can guess, niche forums tend to be some of the most unforgiving and toxic places on the internet. Mix that with the relative rabidity of Star Wars fans, and 9 times out of 10 you have a schism just waiting to happen. Sometimes going against the norm and delivering a radically inventive product can incite jealousy. This, unfortunately, is a rather normal occurrence within the Star Wars preservation community, and this certainly wouldn't be the last time jealousy would cause an exodus of talented individuals. After the release of the classic editions, Garrett was put under an unforgiving amount of scrutiny, and after some disagreements which arose a few years later concerning the X-Zero project, Garrett ended up being forced off OriginalTrilogy.com for good. With OriginalTrilogy.com having a unfortunate habit of deleting threads which may reveal the compromising decisions made by their moderating team, it's very difficult to piece together exactly what happened all those years ago. Though despite this controversy, everyone I've spoken to has only said good things about Garrett. He has an admirable work ethic and an inventive mind. Garrett, however, has still chosen to keep his distance from Star Wars and has no intention of ever returning. This, of course, comes with some clear downsides. Because he is no longer active in this community, he rarely gets any credit for the work he accomplished. He expressed his frustrations with me over email. Sometimes I wish I got at least a little credit for being the guy who comes up with stuff like despecialized Star Wars that others then run with. I often feel like the sacrificial lamb, a guy who comes up with the idea and is then pushed aside by others who want to claim it. History tends to favor those who have the power to control the narrative, and unfortunately, in Garrett's case, most people only remember him for the drama his work was associated with, and not for what it did to progress fan preservation at large. While for Garrett, things haven't always gone smoothly, today he continues work in the film industry and is an honorary member of American Cinema Editors. He continues extensive fan editing work, has painted hundreds of covers to retro video games, and so much more. The work he did was groundbreaking, even if it was a product of its time. The classic editions walked so that the despecialized editions could run. As I told Garrett, being a critic is easy, but being kind is not. We should all strive to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their mistakes, and celebrate their accomplishments for what they're worth. This has been the story of Garrett Gilchrist and the Classic Editions.